My name is Jason.
My given name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old school RPG podcast.
And in this episode, we encounter magic and mendacity in The Lies of the Child Kingdom.
Our first segment is the basic crawl. Listeners, we have kind of a special episode for you today. So this year, the Gauntlet, which Fear of a Black Dragon is part of, had an online gaming convention called Gauntlet Con. Gauntlet Con 2017 took place in October, late October. And leading up to Gauntlet Con 2017, we had a writing contest. The writing contest was called the Keepers of the Gauntlet Writing Contest. And the idea was, well, let me back up. As part of the Gauntlet's Patreon, our Patreon supporters get a special Keeper of the Gauntlet title. And these are very, very evocative things, mostly dark, but sometimes whimsical and mysterious, right? And the idea behind this writing contest was we wanted participants to either write a Dungeon World starter or an OSR adventure inspired by or using elements from some of the Keepers of the Gauntlet names. And so we had this contest leading up to Gauntlet Con. I had a contest team that helped me whittle down the entries to, I think, 6 finalists is what we came down to finally. We presented the 6 finalists to our judges, and then the judges, using a system of votes, managed to select a winner. And one of the prizes that the winner was entitled to or was going to receive, whether they wanted to or not, I think, is to have their module featured on either Discern Realities, our Dungeon World podcast, or if it was an OSR winner, on Fear of a Black Dragon. And the winner was an OSR winner, so that's what we're doing today. I should like to mention real quickly, the judges we had for this contest were pretty outstanding. So you know they picked a good one, right? Yeah. Because they're such exemplary judges. We had Kate Bullock, who is a co-host of one of our other shows and is a big gamer and community organizer in the Toronto scene. We had Jason Lutz, who has written a bunch of well-received Dungeon World stuff. Eric Neodon, who wrote Macchiato Monsters, which is an OSR system. Ray Otis, who's done OSR and Dungeon World stuff. Sarah Richardson from Magpie, who's also done a lot of stuff for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Evelyn Moreau, an OSR artist. Sophia Brandt, a blogger who focuses on fantasy things. And Marshall Miller, who created the Dungeon World starter concept. So our winner was The Lies of the Child Kingdom. Tom, why don't you just kick us off with a crawl there?
Sure. Well, I guess the first thing to say is that this was written by Michael G. Barford, so many congratulations to him. And I will kick off with the paragraph that kicks off his entry into the contest, because I can think of no better way to encapsulate what this module is about. So if you'll allow me a moment to get into character. Rascals, rapscallions, gutter-snipes, and ne'er-do-wells comprise the citizenry of the Child Kingdom, a place where the abandoned and destitute can find a sense of belonging and autonomy. There's no grown-ups around to tell you what to do, and King Bohemian exercises his rule with nothing but charisma and panache. There's candy shops that sell cigars, and stick-and-poke tattoo parlors, sprawling tree houses and lean-to castles, gangs of pirates and tribes of savages engaged in make-believe wars. Crocodiles are kept as pets. Curfew is a laughable farce, and breakfast is for dinner. Perhaps you are a child, a new citizen of the kingdom, or maybe you're an interloping grown-up with your own agenda. So that, in a nutshell, is the setup, but then the document itself is a kind of process for taking you through what you need to do to set up this situation in your game, and there are a whole bunch of different options as to how it's all going to play out within that overall concept. So then the first thing you get is a question for the player characters. Why did you come here? And that comes with a D6 table of agendas, each for adult and child characters. If you're creating brand new characters for the scenario, you're then required to tell the person to your left, how do you know each other? And again, there's a table of D6 relationships between children, between adults, and then between a child and adult character. And then there are D6 available rumors which are stirring up the citizens of the Child Kingdom into some kind of anxiety or excitement.
And we should mention that in the text, there's a bit of advice here that I'm just going to read directly from it at this point in the module that is really quite, I think it's like the anchor of the module, right? It says, there are some things about the kingdom that are absolutely true. There is indeed an enchantment on the land that protects all children from mortal injury. You don't have to listen to grown-ups when they tell you what to do. But there is a truth that is often overlooked. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably isn't. And that is really the main thrust of this module, right? Yeah. It's about adults lying to children. From there, the module proceeds with a number of very interesting and evocative tables, including 1d4 lies that the citizens of the Child Kingdom are told. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later more. 1d6 inciting events. This is a table of things that can kind of they give the GM a chance to sort of prompt the players to action, basically, right? 1d6 enemy types, and then within each enemy type, there is a d6 variance on those enemies. We have a d20 table for names, 3 different tables, in fact, Frenchish, rascal, and then location names. And then finally, there is a list of charity websites. Michael makes a point of saying in the text that this module deals with themes of violence towards children, child slave labor, things like that. And I think in a very thoughtful sort of little addendum to the module, he notes that if you, this is all kind of fun and games, but take these issues seriously as well, both when you're playing and if you want to kind of support some of these organizations that do good work related to children, then go check them out. So why don't we just kind of move on into things that we liked about the module. And I should mention at the outset that this is the rare instance where neither of us have played the module.
It's a purely theoretical exercise, yeah.
Right, totally theoretical exercise. In every other episode we do, at least one of us will have played it, through it. But in this case, because of the circumstances that it came to us, we just didn't have a chance to really do it. But Tom, what did you like about it from a read?
Oh man, well, I mean, I like so much about this, and I will cop to when I first read about the contest, one of the thoughts that flitted across my mind was, I hope a Dungeon World thing wins this so I don't have to review it. But it turned out that was a complete underestimation of the caliber of entries that we got. All the finalists are great, and this is particularly good, so more for me. I think just the central plank of this, the Child Kingdom, is just the best idea, right? It's a classic fantasy idea. And it's one that goes back way earlier than, when we talk about classic fantasy, elf games, D&D, right? We're talking about Lord of the Rings and Lord of the Rings derived stuff, okay? But this is 19th century things like the Water Babies, Peter Pan, which came, decades later than that. In Pinocchio, what's it called in the film? Is it in
Pleasure Island?
In the original, it's like Il Paese dei Balocchi, so that would be Toyland or Land of Amusements, I guess. And so this is it's weird. It's a strand that you don't necessarily think about until you see it presented here, and you realize that, that's a thing, this kind of lawless kids land. And it's something that has persisted, as we'll know from it recurring in other great works of the Western canon, such as Lord of the Flies, Fallout 3, and of course, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome.
Nice. Well, and also, I love this idea that you bring up about sort of even old school fantasy, right? And there are actually direct references to Alice in Wonderland in the text, right?
Yes, yeah.
Or I guess through the Looking Glass, whichever one has the Jabberwocky.
I think you actually hear it or see the text of the poem in the Looking Glass.
Yeah. I know in most collections, it's in the middle, between the two books. So in any case, just kind of hammering home this idea that there is fantasy older and beyond Lord of the Rings, right? So I like that about it as well. For me, what I love about this module is, well, it's wildly imaginative and evocative, and Michael manages to get a lot done in a fairly low word count. The contest had a word count limit for OSR entries of 2,000 words, which is really not a lot. He has managed to take what is largely a collection of tables and, well, let me back up. So I think what he's done successfully here is because he was working within a limited word count, he used the OSR sort of device of tables to sort of build out his world, right? So we have all these tables, and that's principally all it is, but they're so evocative and they have so many interesting little tidbits that you get this really, really clear idea of what this world is about, which I'm sure is helped along by the fact that it clearly has, literary inspirations behind it. But I just like that. I like that it feels so well considered and kind of fully realized in such a small word count. I think that's great. The other thing I love is that, so it's called The Lies of the Child Kingdom, and there are essentially 4 different big lies, right?
Yeah.
And I might take a minute just to mention them really quickly. These lies they're basically like 4 different versions of the module, essentially, because you pick one or you roll on the table, and that has a big effect on what kind of child kingdom it is. So the first child kingdom the first lie is, you can be whoever you want when you grow up. And this is a lie because basically in the kingdom, the kids are turned into beasts of burden and are forced to labor for King Bohemian or whatever other villain is there. The other lie is, there are starving children outside the kingdom. Make sure you clean your plate. And this is a really interesting one because the supporting text within this lie suggests that the child kingdom is a sort of like a sort of industrial fantasy kind of setting, with some of the things that are there. And what's really going on is that we learn that the child kingdom is actually filled with like slave laborers, right? That's kind of the idea for that one. The other lie is, you're safe in your beds. In this frame, the child kingdom is all about monsters, demons that are kind of kidnapping the children. And then the fourth one, which is very much inspired by Peter Pan, you can do anything if you believe in yourself. You can even fly. And this one has that sort of Peter Pan like whimsy to it, which I think is really quite thematically different from some of the other ones. And so I just like that there are basically 4 different versions of this module that you can play in. But what's great about it is all of the supporting tables, the various names of things and whatnot, they slot in really easily to any of these 4 things, right? So it's just a really carefully considered module in that way, right? Like you're getting kind of 4 different settings basically that use a lot of the same support material to make it work.
Yeah, that's right. And they're really, this is definitely, it's the core of it. And I think that they are just wonderfully, that idea of, this is what they tell you, and then this is the reverse of it, because of course they're reverses in different ways. There are starving children outside the kingdom. That probably is true, but it's a lie by omission, because there are also starving children inside the kingdom. I think that's an interesting way to do it. And of course the great thing is you can just tell all 4 of these alleged facts to the PCs when they arrive on the island. And it's one of those things that makes it a little bit spoiler-proof, Like, there's only 1 in 4 of these things will be the real lie. The real lie? That's confusing. You know what I mean.
It's twisty, right? That's good. Okay, well, so do we have any questions about this one?
Yeah, I wonder, is it difficult to get this into an ongoing game? Like, if you're already, I don't know, you just finished, let's say, Keep on the Borderlands in original D&D, and you want to add this, like, what happens then? Is there a tone mismatch?
Quite a shift. I don't know. I mean, I guess there is support in the text of the module for that, right? I mean, there is a part where the module has a list of like agendas, and he very cleverly, these tables of like your character agendas, your PC agendas, he very cleverly like separates them into 2 different types. There's agendas for children, or origins for children, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Like why the kids might be there. And there's also agendas for adults who might have found themselves on the in the child kingdom. And so I don't think it'd be impossible. I mean, these seem like the sorts of things you could pretty easily adapt to your game. Like, I'm stranded here until I can find passage home. Or I arrived here by accident and now I'm curious. Or someone I know lives here and I'm worried about them. I mean, I don't know. I think the biggest challenge I think for this one would be the tone and managing that in your game. Like if you're going for a particular type of tone in your game, this one could be a little tricky because it does have it's dark, but it also has a sort of whimsy to its fantasy that I think a lot of D&D type fantasy doesn't have. Yeah,
that's very true. I think the other issue is if you are kind of dead set on having the PCs be the children, or at least some of them, that's going to be basically, unless you've already started off with a kind of band of 12-year-old adventurers, that's not going to work out. But if you wanted to add a new player character to the group, this would be a great place to pick them up and just bring them with you off the island.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I actually wondered about that too. Like, I don't play a lot of OSR systems, so I'm not sure like what you would have to do to like have a child character. I'm not sure what the implications of that are. I know that Michael says in the text that he kind of had Beyond the Wall in mind when he wrote it, but I'm not familiar enough with that game to say like, I don't know, like I'm not sure like how kids fit into it. I'm not sure how you like have kid PCs in a more traditional OSR system. I assume they probably just work the same, maybe with like some lower stats in certain ways or something.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, honestly, I don't know if I'd even change the stats that much, but then you get into a philosophical discussion of like, you know, does strength 4 mean that I'm actually not strong, or is it just whenever I rely on my strength to do something, it usually goes wrong, right?
Right, yeah.
And so, you could just allow the child characters to be stats-wise the same as everyone else, but then within the fiction, they have things they can and can't do. Like they can crawl through small holes to escape from barns, but they can't persuade grown-ups that there's an owl bear roosting in said barn, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
I do have another question, which is, I had a quick look in the list of keeper names in Codex, but I couldn't figure out which name this is based on. Do you know?
Yeah, it is actually the keeper of the lies of the Child Kingdom. That is Christopher Gray's keeper title name. Christopher Gray is the author of the recently kickstarted game, The Happiest Apocalypse on Earth, which is sort of a dark spoof on Disneyland and places like that. And so when I gave him this keeper title, that's what I had in mind, was his game.
Oh, that's it. That's a good, that's a good correlation then, because this could be a sinister amusement park, much like in Pinocchio. So good work.
Yeah. There's a lot of synergy going on here.
Okay, cool. Let's, shall we move on to Chain Lightning?
Let's do the Chain Lightning round. Why don't you go ahead and kick it off?
The first thing I like is the D20 table of rascal names, which reminds me of the 700 hobo names list written by the comedian John Hodgman, which appeared in a book he wrote and that he later recorded as a kind of spoken word musical track that goes on for an hour. Which you can find at ehobo.com if you want to see that list. My favorite in this one is Baddie No Shoes.
It's pretty good. My first is the location names table. There are so many awesome locations on here. The Whiskey Lagoon, the Homesick Cliffs, the rock that looks like a face. So good. Love it.
I like that. I can just imagine. Yeah, I'll meet you next to the rock that looks like a face at 3. Yeah, it's perfect. Okay, so in summary, we liked the names because my second item is the D20 Frenchish names, which I find just Frenchish enough to be kind of hilarious. You know, that sort of Pompon is one name, and the next one on the list is Moose.
Yeah.
And then there's like one like Davignon is one, which of course is a reference to is it a folk song or a nursery rhyme? I guess the difference is and kind of merges together over the years.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm going to go with one of the monster tracks, one of the little categories of monsters, the bogey golems. There is a list of monsters called the bogey golems. These are like things that kids hate in golem form, which is just so imaginative. I've got a couple of examples here if I can find them. 1 second. For example, a laundry golem, the boo-boo kissing golem, and the broccoli golem.
That's pretty good. Oh, actually, yeah, let's come back to that in Companion Adventures. I just thought of something. My third lightning round item is one of the lies, the first one, I think, in the table, which is about having the kids turn into beasts of burden. Of course, that's from Pinocchio. Spoiler alert for a book released in the 1880s, where, you know, after some time they turn into, I think it's donkeys, right? They start to, and in the cartoon, they start to grow ears, you know, donkey ears, and then gradually transform into them. And that's I like that. It's a sinister image, the idea of these sorrowful beasts of burden with 2 human eyes, so you get a clue that there's something wrong. And, you know, that sort of Logan's Run thing of getting too old and then being forced out of the society or just killed. Spoiler there for Logan's Run, by the way.
For a spoiler, 100% spoilers cast. My final chain lightning round item is, I mentioned it earlier, but there are different agendas for adult characters and kid characters. And I love that. Well, to be specific, the kids are actually, they're not agendas, they're origins, but it's the same idea. Why are you here? And I love that because it shows that Michael took that into consideration, right? Like the different ways you might be approaching this module and kind of giving you some tools to get into it easily.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. Let's crash on to the expert delve.
It's the expert delve. So I'm probably not going to run this in an OSR system, but I'm almost certainly going to run it in some sort of story game system. I'm going to do some story game adaptations, I think, for this. I really love it. And so I wanted to talk about story game adaptation ideas for this module. That's something we do here on Fear of a Black Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got a few ideas, and if you've got some ideas, Tom, I'd love to hear them as well. I think that this module wants to be done in troop play. Troop play is when you have a big collection of characters and you either play groups of them or you kind of rotate around with everybody playing different characters in the troop. I just imagine like all these like rascal, mean little kids, like mean, drunk, cigar smoking little kids roaming around doing, misbehavior and mischief. And, I want to play all of them, right? So I'm thinking a really great troop play game is The Final Girl. The Final Girl is a story game where you tell the story of a slasher horror film. That's the normal frame of it. You have a bunch of characters and a killer kind of picks them off one by one, but you play the different characters. You kind of rotate around as you play. And I could see a really great Final Girl here. You would kind of set everything up as per the Lies of the Child Kingdom module. You'd come up with a killer, which could be any of a number of things in the module. There could be literal killer. Perhaps it's one of the monsters from the table. But more interestingly, it could be an entity that doesn't actually kill the children, but rather kidnaps them, enslaves them, transforms them, whatever. You could have, for example, Pirate Queen Dominique swooping in periodically to grab a kid. You could have that Santa Claus-like figure transform a kid into a beast of burden. There's a wood witch who, we don't know exactly what she gets up to, presumably turns them into, soup or candy or whatever. So you could come up with a pretty easy killer from the tables, and then you would just come up with some characters using the tables. You'd have to do a little bit of extra work to give each of the characters a description because every character has to have like a one-line description.
All right.
But some of the names might be very helpful in that regard. For example, one of the names is Foul Fellow, and so you could write that as Foul Fellow who smells absolutely wretched.
Yeah. The rascal names probably write themselves. The Frenchish ones you would have to work a little harder on, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Precisely. So I could see an easy Final Girl here. That'd be an easy one. I think you could do, sticking with troop style play, I think Goblin Quest by Grant Howitt would be a really terrific fit for this.
Really? Okay. Explain how.
Okay, well, so in normal Goblin Quest, you have a pack of, I think it's like 5 or 6 goblins every player does, right? And there's a little silhouette of the goblin, and you kind of draw them, you kind of personalize each little goblin, right? You give them a name. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind Goblin Quest is the goblins are trying to complete some sort of task for this wizard necromancer character who they serve, right? So I'm thinking for this module, you could very easily do like a little gingerbread man or child-like silhouette, that you put on a character sheet that you kind of whip up really quickly in Word or whatever. And in Goblin Quest, your goblins have they have a feature that shows that they're all from the same goblin clutch or whatever, right? Like, okay, we're goblins from this tribe of goblins, and we all have this one little tiny feature, but then you kind of personalize them in different ways. You could do that with these kids, right? You could have all your little kids. You could roll on the tables to get their names. You could pick a location from the location table and say, oh, my kids are all from the Whiskey Lagoon, right? And so that's what they're all about, right? Or my kids are all from I think there's one called the Toy Pit or something, the Pit of Lost Toys or something like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe, so yeah, the Lost Toy Pit. So maybe if all your kids come from the Lost Toy Pit or they hang out at the Lost Toy Pit, you draw them so they have some like little toy theme or whatever, right? And then you just have the kids like going on a mission to do something for King Bohemian, right? And okay, they die in the middle of it.
Yeah, I'm going to say it has to be something from my knowledge of Goblin Quest. It has to be something basically impossible, right? So,
right, yeah. I mean, in Goblin Quest, the goblins do die one by one, but you could readjust that to have it be, maybe they're turned into donkeys. Or
Sure. Oh, I mean, yeah, I guess it's probably the Swamp Witch or whatever she's called would be the easiest one for that. Like, you have to go and lift a few gingerbread tiles off the roof of her house, and then
right, exactly.
That's something they can easily be kind of thrown into cages and fattened up for the oven and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason why Goblin Quest has so much appeal for me here is in Goblin Quest, the task that the goblins are doing it's usually kind of stupid and not anything earth shattering. Right? It's like, let's bake a cake for the wizard or whatever. Right? Okay. And so I think that sort of like dialed down stakes or kind of scope of adventure is kind of perfect. It's a perfect fit for the Lies of the Child Kingdom, where these kids might just be trying to get up to some dumb kid thing, right? Other ideas I had. Oh, actually, well, I'll toss to you for a second, Tom. Any ideas before I keep going?
Sure, yeah. Oh, you've got, yeah. Okay, well, I don't want to break your flow. Okay, I've only got one idea, so I'll throw it in now, which is Lovecraft-esque.
Now, this I want to hear, so.
All right, okay. I guess it is troop play as well. In fact, it is. There's only one player character, but it's a troop of people playing them. So, Lovecraft-esque by, let me get this right, is it Josh Fox and Becky Anderson? Or... That's right. Yep. And it's a Lovecraftian game, hence the name, in which there is a single investigator and you need at least, I think, normally, let's say there's a group of 4 players. So you have one person is being the investigator, one person is the narrator. That's more like the traditional GM role. And the other 2 are, I think it's called the witnesses. They provide sort of creepy background details and stuff like that. And in each scene, something gets discovered about the mystery as the protagonist goes forward, and then everyone rotates roles. So everyone gets a turn, or several turns, playing the investigator, and they all kind of come up with their ideas about the solution to the mystery as they go along. And of course, this being a list of tables with mystery elements is perfect, because that is how Lovecraft-esque scenarios are done. There are kind of a list of thematic elements, clues, non-player characters that you can throw in, kind of inspiration lists. And so you could very easily just grab all of the entries that we have here on the D6 and D20 tables, and you've basically got your Lovecraft-esque scenario. I think it would be pretty cool to make the investigator a child who's starting to figure out the lie, rather than having the typical, Call of Cthulhu Lovecraft thing would be a white male adult comes from the outside and investigates the horrors of this child kingdom. But I think it would be more interesting to have it be a shattering the veil of innocence kind of experience.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you think of like Pinocchio arriving at Pleasure Island and being really into it at first.
Yeah.
Right? But then he gradually begins to realize how terrible it is. Right. Yeah. Or well, I guess Jiminy Cricket does, but in the cartoon. But
yeah, he could be an NPC that gradually, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think I was going to ask you, so in Lovecraft-esque, you're kind of building up to this sort of final cosmic horror, right? And in fact, you can't even face the cosmic horror. Like, you just automatically lose or whatever once you get there. Or I think that's basically how it goes.
I think that's it, yeah.
I don't think you can defeat it or anything. And so I'm curious, how would you see this going? Like, okay, they're unraveling the mystery. That part all makes sense. But what are they leading up to? Like, just the revelation of what's really going on?
Yeah, I think it would have to be that. And obviously, you'd have to be introducing your own elements. It couldn't just be those sort of 4 things on the lies table. Some of them, like the changing into beasts of burden, the slave labor plots, those I think would work fine for the revelation. The fairy lifespan thing for the being able to fly, that's a bit iffy. I don't know how you would get that to be horrifying. So, but then again, that's the point. You've got 4 people all kind of sitting down working on this, or 2 to 5, I think it is the player count. So if you can't think of anything great by the end, that's okay, because someone else at the table probably will have a good answer.
We'll probably have it covered. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I love it. My other recommendation was going to be Misspent Youth, which is a game by Robert Bull, I should say. And in Misspent Youth, classic story game, you play a group of YOs, which stands for youthful offenders, who are rebelling against this authority figure, which is usually like a big central government, big brother type entity in your setting, right? what you normally do is you sit down as a group and you decide what the authority is. You talk about the world. You make all these different elements and things like that. You could just use the module for that, right? Like you could just totally just grab the module, have King Bohemian be your authority figure. I mean, the world creation process for Misspent Youth, it basically does itself if you use this module, right? Like you just by answering the questions for Misspent Youth, you just look to the module and kind of fill in the details, right? It would work really, really easily. Your youthful offenders are going to be kids, like who maybe are realizing this sort of dark underbelly of the child kingdom and what they're kind of, what's really going on, and they want to push back against it. In this frame, the kids already know the lie, right? And they are rebelling against the lie. So I think that would be a really, really fun way to use this module.
Right. I think this would, in contrast to Lovecraft's Death, because this would be a very easy fit for that fourth lie, the one about you can fly if you believe in yourself, because that is a deal that the authority figure has made on your behalf without telling you about it, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. And if that doesn't make you want to become youth in revolt, I don't know what will.
Indeed. Anyway, just some ideas. Any other last-minute thoughts on that?
Well, just as a callback to Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, of course, that's post-apocalyptic child kingdoms are... Actually, now that I think about it, they're kind of a common trope. Yeah, there's one in Fallout, in the only game of that series that I played, Fallout 3. There's one in Mad Max. I'm sure it's been in other stuff as well. And I think you could, playing Apocalypse World or something like that, you should definitely think about a slightly weird, creepy child-inhabited island that you could wind up in by mistake. And whether or not those kids could fly would be, I think would depend strongly on just how weird your campaign is. But... yeah, that would be pretty good.
Awesome. Cool. Well, those are some ideas for how to maybe adapt this module to some story game contexts. Let's go to companion adventures. Okay, it's the companion adventures. I'm going to go ahead and just get the easy ones out of the way. The Pleasure Island sequence from Disney's Pinocchio, that's the easiest, fastest way to get a feel for what this module is trying to convey, right? If you've never seen it, go watch it. It's all on YouTube, that part of it. It's great. I just watched it in preparation for recording this episode. And I mean, you can tell where Michael got his inspirations from, right? Like there's, they're like, cigars are being passed out to these little boys. They're encouraged to get into fights and destroy things. And of course, the donkey transformation is directly from there. So the Pleasure Island sequence from the Disney movie Pinocchio, almost mandatory viewing, I think, if you're going to run this. There are some other things too, as we've kind of mentioned here and there throughout this episode. Peter Pan's Lost Boys, all those scenes from Disney's Peter Pan would be great. I'm going to suggest The Nightmare Before Christmas, actually, which I think is a Disney movie now. I'm not sure.
Maybe, yeah. Sure, why not? Yeah.
The provenance of that one's always been confusing to me. I love the idea of The Nightmare Before Christmas because The Nightmare Before Christmas has this kind of, I am a person, in this case, Jack Skellington, who is dropped into this sort of themed world, right? And this weird, whimsical themed world, and I'm a fish out of water, and all these people behave a certain way. I just got that strong vibe from this module when I was reading it. I think those are the really, really easy things. What do you have, Tom?
I have also gone for an easy choice, specifically an art recommendation, which is the engravings that were the illustrations in the original edition of The Adventures of Pinocchio, and they are available for free on Wikimedia. So if you go and look for, it's under Le Avventure di Pinocchio, but I think if you just type in Pinocchio and find some pictures, that'll do it. And so that includes the illustrations for, obviously, the Pleasure Island section, but also just the whole style of everything, the weird, slightly dark, kind of whimsical, not that whimsical adventures in there are, I think, just really great for mood setting. And you could even use them for pictures for characters that appear during the game.
What about music recommendations? I know we have a couple. I'll kick mine off. For music, I've got some Tom Waits. On Tom Waits' album Rain Dogs, there are a few really fun songs, which the lyrics don't necessarily connect to anything to do with this module, but the sort of feeling of them connects for me. Those are going to be Singapore, Cemetery Polka, Diamonds and Gold, and the title track, Rain Dogs. What I love about these songs and why I think they're great inspiration for this module is they have a sort of like bump, 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 bump kind of like bouncy quality to them, which almost a childlike quality, but they're also really dark. They sound a little bit like weird sea shanties, or they have that kind of quality to them, right? They're a little fantastical. And yeah, it just sounds like something you might hear playing in the background of the Child Kingdom as you're roaming around. So.
Well, definitely. And I had the same thought, right? Which is, I was trying to think of, I was thinking Tom Waits songs, but what would fit, right? Because the lyrics, I was thinking, are there any good instrumental tracks available? And the answer is kind of no, right? But then I started trying to think, well, what are his influences? And so the thing is that around the early 20th century, you start to see these, or a bit earlier, these kind of folk song and polka inspired orchestral compositions, and Stravinsky's Petrushka, which is a ballet about puppets that come to life and enact various dramas, has that kind of, syncopated, Tom Waitsy.
Syncopated, that's the word I was looking for earlier. Yeah.
Going on. And so that would be I guess it's about an hour long. That's normally how long ballet suites are. And that kind of goes through all kinds of different kind of sprightly, whimsical. We've been saying whimsical an awful lot in this episode. And then like a little bit dark and scary bits. So I think Petrushka is a good choice for background music.
Awesome.
And I have one more thing to add to the companion adventures, which is a children's cartoon of, I think, the 1980s that I was reminded of when you were talking about the bogey golems in our Chain Lightning round. And that cartoon is called Stop It and Tidy Up. And in this, all of the characters were these strange little creatures that lived in like a junkyard or something. That part I don't really remember. But what I do remember is they were all named after things that parents say to kids that they don't like. So, for example, there was one called Wash Your Face, who likes jumping in puddles. There was one called Eat Your Greens, and obviously Stop It and Tidy Up, the two main characters. And then the big monster that scared everyone in the setting was called The Big Bad I Said No. So if you want some visual inspiration for your bogey golems, perhaps go, and I think it'll be on YouTube somewhere. That's Stop It and Tidy Up, the 80s UK cartoon, narrated by the late Sir Terry Wogan.
Awesome. Well, listeners, that's our show. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find us on the Gauntlet G Plus community. Just go to the community section of G Plus and search for the Gauntlet. You'll find us there. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. We're on Twitter at GauntletRPG. And if you'd like to support us on Patreon, it's patreon.com/Gauntlet. Tom, thanks so much.
Oh, thank you, Jason.
Oh, hey, Tom, Before we go, this is one of the final episodes for the year, and I would really love to kick off 2018 with a brand new title for this show. Any thoughts?
Well, actually, in the spirit of community participation, I was kind of flicking through the reams of fan mail that we get in the odd inbox there, and so
reams and reams.
Oh, yes. So I picked out a suggestion that came from a listener, although in the interest of not playing favourites, I have already forgotten who it was. And that is, wait for it, 3 Feet High and Halfling.